A simple moment. I never imagined that a simple moment spent with my dog while my husband was away could become one of the most significant days of my life. It all started a few weeks ago when my husband went on a business trip, leaving me alone at home with Rocky, our golden retriever. The house, in his absence, had a heavy tranquility, a silence that was heavier than the mere absence of noise. It wasn't new to me. Over time, I had learned to live with this solitude. My husband's trips were frequent, sometimes stretching over entire weeks. I understood his professional obligations and didn't resent him. After all, his work allowed us to live comfortably in a spacious house, with a large garden where Rocky loved to play. Rocky was my constant companion, a loyal friend who had shared my days for 5 years. We had adopted him when he was just a clumsy puppy, and since then he had grown to become much more than just a pet. His presence calmed me in an inexplicable way, especially during these long absences of my husband. That evening, like many others, the emptiness of the house weighed heavily. I tried to fill the silence with some music and a movie, but nothing seemed to soothe this feeling. Rocky, true to himself, came and lay down next to me, resting his head on my lap as if to say, "I'm here." As I ran my hand through his soft fur, I felt a wave of comfort. It was in this simple and silent moment that I realized how much he had filled a void I didn't always dare to acknowledge. This work gave us a comfortable life in the suburbs, a spacious home, a generous garden, and a solitude that seemed to stretch on, leaving only Rocky and me in this too large space. Rocky, this four-legged companion, had entered our lives 5 years ago, a clumsy ball of fur who had grown to become my anchor. As my husband was away more and more often, Rocky was there, loyal, affectionate, always ready to greet me with a loving gaze, as if he understood things that only humans are supposed to perceive. The evenings, especially long and quiet, took on a different hue thanks to him. After a quick and often solitary dinner, I found Rocky lying at my feet, his golden coat warming my skin. He had this unique way of reminding me that, even in silence, I wasn't completely alone. His tail would gently tap the floor every time I met his gaze, and this simple gesture was enough to calm my thoughts. One evening, as I petted his back, a question crossed my mind. What would I have done without him? My daily life, though comfortable, sometimes seemed so empty. My husband and I had built a stable life, but the repeated absences had created an imperceptible gap, a distance we never spoke of. Yet with Rocky, this emptiness seemed more bearable. He wasn't just a dog. He was a silent confidant, a pillar I unconsciously leaned on. In those moments of simple companionship, I realized how much his presence had given meaning to those days when the absence weighed heavier than usual. That evening, the emptiness of the house seemed to stretch on infinitely, enveloping each room in a heavy silence. The television left on in the background only provided noise to fill the space, unable to mask the feeling of loneliness creeping in. After leaving my half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table, I turned to Rocky lying at my feet. He lifted his head, his large eyes full of silent understanding, as if he read me better than anyone. I found myself whispering almost to myself, "You're here always." He responded with a soft wag of his tail on the rug, a gesture that seemed to want to ease the weight I carried. Evenings without my husband often followed this same pattern. Once the little distractions were exhausted, I found myself facing my thoughts. Tonight, they circled around this strange feeling of emptiness that had taken root in my life. The house, despite its apparent warmth, seemed too large, too quiet. Rocky, on the other hand, remained there, still but reassuring, a tangible and living presence in a routine that had become mechanical. I continued to pet his fur, sometimes pausing just to feel the warmth of his body against my hand. You know, Rocky, sometimes I wonder. I started before falling silent, as if putting my doubts into words would make them too real. He hadn't moved, his gaze fixed on me with a quiet intensity, and it was in this shared silence that I felt for a moment a little less alone. As the evening stretched on, the silence became almost deafening. The hours seemed to drag on with exasperating slowness. I stared at my phone screen, absently scrolling through photos of people surrounded by their families, their laughter and chaos almost palpable through the images. This contrast made my solitude even heavier. Rocky, lying next to me, gently placed his head on my lap, bringing a smile despite everything. I let my fingers slide into his warm fur, appreciating the serenity he brought. You know, sometimes I wish it were simpler, Rocky, I murmured as if speaking softly made my thoughts less heavy. He made a small sound, somewhere between a sigh and a satisfied grunt, and his tail wagged slowly. Rocky had this particular talent of making the hardest moments bearable. He never judged, never asked questions. He was just there, constant and reassuring. It was something I held on to, especially in those moments when everything seemed uncertain. I got up to pour myself another glass of wine, and Rocky followed me, a loyal golden shadow. His presence made me realize how unbearable these solitary evenings would be without him. Returning to the couch, I sank heavily and he settled next to me once again, his gaze fixed on me as if to make sure I was okay. In this shared silence, something precious existed, an authentic connection, simple yet profound, and for that I was infinitely grateful. I watched Rocky, his calm and steady breathing bringing a kind of rhythm to the silence surrounding me. His soft fur under my fingers seemed to be the only tangible link to warmth, an authentic presence. What would we do without each other, huh? I murmured to him, half serious, half amused. His tail responded with a gentle wag as if to reassure me that as long as he was there, I would never be completely alone. The minutes continued to pass, the darkness of the night thickening through the windows. I got up to close the curtains, avoiding the black emptiness that seemed to reflect the emptiness of the house. Rocky followed me, his golden shadow always by my side. It was a routine we had developed like an unspoken ritual. He never left me, always ready to fill the silences I struggled to bear. Back on the couch, I took a deep breath. You know, Rocky, sometimes I wonder, is it all worth it? This house, this comfort, but so little life inside. He looked at me, his large eyes full of infinite softness. I knew he didn't understand my words, but his gaze said something else. It said, I'm here, I'm listening. There was a kind of magic in those moments, a silent connection, no need for words or explanations, just him and me in this quiet cocoon that made the absences more bearable. And for a moment, despite everything that was missing, I felt like I had everything I needed. I got up, dragging my feet, amused by his infectious energy. The morning ritual played out as always. Opening the door to let him race into the garden, making my coffee while he explored every corner as if discovering an unknown territory. For a few days I had been taking more time to observe him, savoring these simple moments. That morning, however, something unusual happened. As I sipped my coffee, Rocky came running back, an object in his mouth. Curious, I squatted down to take a closer look. It was an old leather notebook worn by time that he had probably unearthed near the trees. What did you find there, big guy? I passed him a treat. As I flipped through the notebook, I found notes, sketches, jotted thoughts. They probably belonged to a former owner of the house. The pages spoke of dreams, projects, but also of solitude and questioning. I couldn't help but see echoes of my own reflections in these old writings. Rocky, sitting beside me, observed with his usual calm. You have a way of bringing me back to the essentials, I whispered, stroking his head. This notebook, though simple and worn, had sparked something in me. Maybe it was time to find a new way to fill these silences, to bring more life into these walls. This moment marked the beginning of a different day, brighter, propelled by the unexpected discovery and the ever-present kindness of Rocky. A day when, for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope in this often monotonous routine. Rocky's your best therapist. Sitting on that bench, surrounded by the rustling of trees and the distant laughter of children, I let my thoughts drift. Rocky, sitting at my feet, observed the world with peaceful curiosity, his bright eyes following the flight of birds or the movements of a daring squirrel. You know, Rocky, I think I've forgotten what it feels like to truly feel alive, I murmured almost to myself. He perked up his ears as if waiting for more, and I continued, my gaze lost on the horizon. Maybe that's the problem. All this silence, all this waiting. What am I really waiting for? The wind played in my hair, carrying my words far away. But he stayed there, still a statue of loyalty and comfort. I smiled, remembering a phrase my husband liked to repeat. Rocky's your best therapist, right? In that moment, he might have been right. Back at home, something in me had changed imperceptibly. Maybe it was that one-sided conversation. Maybe the serenity of the park, or maybe just the constant and reassuring presence of Rocky. I grabbed a blank notebook from the desk drawer, a pencil, and began to write. Thoughts, dreams, buried desires. The need to express, to leave a mark, took me by surprise. With each word written on the page, I felt a new lightness, a hint of awakening. Rocky had laid down at my feet as if guarding this small inner revolution. That day, he didn't just listen to me. He inspired me. You know, Rocky, sometimes I wonder if this is really the life we wanted, I murmured, my voice getting lost in the calm of the house. He lifted his head, his amber eyes locking with mine with an intensity that almost made me believe he understood every word. His snout nuzzled my hand, insisting that I continue to pet him, as if this simple gesture was enough to calm the tumultuous thoughts swirling in my mind. Lately, this question had been occupying my mind more and more. Is this really the life I had imagined? A spacious house but empty, a husband often absent, and a routine marked by silent conversations with my golden retriever. Yet Rocky made it all bearable, even precious. He never asked questions, never judged, but offered a constant and reassuring presence. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I decided to open up a little more. You know, Rocky, I've always dreamed of traveling. Not to follow someone, but for myself. See the world, taste exotic foods, walk through unfamiliar alleys. He tilted his head, curious as if he was saying, "So what's stopping you?" That thought struck me. What was really stopping me? Was it fear, routine, or this persistent feeling that my desire should always come second to others? The next morning, while walking Rocky in the park, I noticed a sign announcing a creative writing workshop at a local bookstore. The idea intrigued me. What if it was a start? Not a big journey, but a small adventure, a step towards something new. Rocky trotted happily beside me, unaware of the inner stir he had triggered. When we returned home, I jotted down the details of the workshop and promised myself I would go. This simple act, this decision made almost casually, triggered a change in me. Maybe all I needed to do was listen to that inner voice that Rocky, in his silent wisdom, always seemed to encourage. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was a little more myself.